Feminist organizations have spent more time than I've been alive attacking the traditional family structure, in particular demonizing fathers and attempting to separate them from their children. They've used the stereotype of the family abandoning deadbeat dad to push for concessions and benefits for single custodial mothers, lied about domestic violence rates to provide women with tools to use in custody battles, and promoted the idea that single mother households are better than intact families. They've fought against all forms of joint custody legislation that would foster cooperation between parents in the event divorce cannot be avoided, mostly by portraying fathers as a group as deadbeats and abusers, as if that is just men's normal behavior. They portray men as a threat to their own wives and children, all for the sake of breaking up families and making as many women and their children as possible dependent on the welfare state. This has been the National Organization for Women's first line of attack against all forms of shared custody going back into the 70s. Their narrative has no basis in fact. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Men are not the ones predominantly breaking up their families. According to Michael Rosenfeld's 2017 report, Who Wants the Breakup? Gender and Breakup in Heterosexual Couples, more divorce is initiated by women. They're not all initiating it over abuse, as now's anti-shared parenting initiatives would indicate. It's mostly over resentment of balance in housework responsibilities, and much of that is due to feminist narratives about gender roles. In other words, feminists have told women to be dissatisfied with their marriages and then blamed men when women became dissatisfied and dissolved their marriages. This comes from a feminist-oriented report which labels the responsibility of marriage proposal a privilege because it falls on the boyfriend and describes him as, quote, controlling the marriage decision, as if women can't also propose or say no when a man proposes. Imagine how unflattering this report would have been to divorcing women without that low agency outlook. While this does not mean that women should be automatically presumed malicious for choosing to end a marriage, it certainly doesn't back the feminist narrative of the family abandoning deadbeat dad. The state's primary response to divorce has been to discourage men from leaving their families via penalties that benefit their ex-wives, but no amount of that punishment of men is going to stop women from initiating divorce. Now's narrative on child abuse as a factor in divorce is just as wrong. Health and Human Services data has consistently shown for over 20 years that more child abuse is perpetrated by mothers than by fathers. Let's look, for example, at the 2017 report Child Maltreatment published by the Children's Bureau. According to Table 317, victims by relationship to their perpetrators, in about 2/3 of the number of cases involving one parent abusing their children, that parent is the mother. From that same report, according to Table 4-4, child fatalities by relationship to their perpetrators, in about 2/3 of cases involving one parent killing their child, that parent is also the mother. The perpetration ratios given in these statistics are consistent with previous reports. Clearly, this does not mean all mothers are bad or abusive. In fact, abuse itself is rare. According to Exhibit 3E, Child Victimization Rates 2013 to 2017, part of that same 2017 report, the national child victimization rate in the U.S. is approximately 9 out of 1,000 children. It also doesn't mean fathers never abuse. In both of the previous citations, the other 1/3 of the abuse described is perpetrated by fathers, and that shouldn't be ignored either. However, the data certainly contradicts the feminist narrative that father involvement, in particular, puts children at risk of abuse. In fact, in the case of either sex parent, one of the best preventative measures against abuse of the family's children may be the other parent's regular involvement. The best case scenario for both families would be for the state to do everything it can to foster family unity and cooperative parenting, preferably in intact households, by not financially incentivizing divorce, or when divorce can't be prevented, through using equally shared parenting as the state's default arrangement and not financially incentivizing parents to try to deny each other custody. Now's male-demonizing narratives on domestic violence are also not a valid excuse to routinely separate fathers from their children. Research does not back them up in this area either. Here I will reference rates of bidirectional versus unidirectional intimate partner violence across samples, sexual orientations, and race and ethnicities, a comprehensive review by Jennifer Langenrichen-Rolling and co-authors. This is a review of 50 studies that reported rates of bidirectional versus unidirectional violence. The researchers found that on average, these studies indicated that 4 out of 5 to 5 out of 6 households were non-violent, that more than half to almost 2/3 of household violence was two-way violence, and that in the under half to 1/3 of remaining households, more than half to more than 2/3 of the violence was perpetrated by the female partner. In other words, women are perpetrators in most households where family violence takes place. This doesn't mean women are too violent to have custody of their kids, but that families in which the father unilaterally abuses the mother, the stereotype feminists use against equally shared parenting legislation, represent a minority in family violence and an extreme minority in families overall. At most, they are about 1/3 of 1/2 of 1/5 of all families, or about 1 in 30 households. Some of the research reviewed in this study found it to be even more rare than that. But what about those bidirectionally violent households? Opponents of equally shared parenting would argue that they can't be bidirectionally violent if the men aren't violent, and that the violent women in these relationships are only defending themselves against the men's initiation. But the data doesn't back that argument either. The same report cites research that included direct observation of reciprocation of violence when initiated by men and women during a videotaped discussion. That study observed initiation and reciprocity of physical aggression in young at-risk couples is discussed on page 14 and 15 of the report. It stated that, of the 49 observation sessions across the 4 time points involving mutual physical aggression, 71.4% involved men reciprocating women-initiated aggression. Conversely, 28.6% involved women reciprocating men-initiated aggression. In other words, when rates of initiation by gender were measured, women initiated about 3/4 of the time. That puts women as the primary aggressors in most family violence, whether we are discussing child abuse or intimate partner violence. Again, recalling that these types of violence are rare among the overall population and that most divorce isn't caused by them, this information does not mean that women should be removed from their children's lives based on the same arguments feminists make about men. It does, however, fully discredit the feminist narrative that men should be removed from their children's lives based on mere allegations of abuse or on belief that limiting custody to the mother would protect children from being subjected to parental violence or exposed to partner violence. On the other hand, removal of the father's nurturing influence can itself be a form of child abuse. The Father Involvement Initiative and the Father Involvement Research Alliance compiled information from hundreds of studies on the effects of father involvement in their children's lives. Most research found that children benefit the most from growing up in intact homes. But even in instances of divorce, father involvement has been shown to have benefits and father absence to have damaging impact on children's welfare. This begins in early childhood when father involvement aids a child's development of social skills and problem-solving ability. School-age children of involved fathers perform better academically, show more involvement with their academic community, and have fewer discipline issues. They also have fewer social issues and are more likely to resolve them without seeking a teacher's assistance. Father involvement also makes kids less likely to go along with other children in making choices that will get them into trouble. As they get older, kids with involved fathers have better school attendance and are more likely to graduate. This trend continues through post-secondary education and is noted to contribute to career success and psychological well-being in adulthood. Kids of involved fathers grow up to be more tolerant of others and more likely to have successful marriages and long-term friendships. They're less likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors such as truancy, substance abuse, or criminal activity. They're less likely to end up in jail or become unwed parents, more likely to be successful, law-abiding, financially independent partners in intact families rather than live in poverty and rely on government aid. They're less likely to experience depression and anxiety issues, less at risk for being abused, and less likely to commit suicide. Our society is just starting to acknowledge and discuss the current epidemic of male suicide, including suicide among boys. How much of the problem is caused by the exclusion of fathers from their sons' lives? What other social ills would be reduced or resolved if fathers' involvement with their children was not widely hindered by custody arrangements? Would we see a reduction in crime, unwed parenthood, poverty, and welfare dependence? Would we see a reduction in the social conditions that contribute to the phenomenon of family violence? In other words, could exclusion or eviction of fathers from their children's lives be creating a self-perpetuating social dysfunction machine? And if so, isn't it the state's responsibility to prevent itself from being a cause of this problem? What does reasonable, functional custody law look like? Tune in to HBR Talk as we discuss the importance of equally shared parenting as the default arrangement for custody following divorce, as well as the importance of continuing to push for that until it becomes a universal standard in custody law. HBR Talk streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options for that time or later on badgerfeed.com.